Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we've got something absolutely insane for you. What if Issei from high school DxD was betrayed by Riaz and taken under Azazel's wing? I know, this sounds wild, but stick with me here. Here's the thing, Issei's sacred gear, the boosted gear, is already absolutely broken, right? We're talking about a weapon that can literally multiply your power infinitely. And when pushed to its limits, it can challenge Satan-class devils. But here's what makes this concept absolutely mind-blowing. What happens when you take that insane potential and forge it through the fires of ultimate betrayal and trauma? We're talking about sacred gear evolution that shouldn't even be possible. Think about it, every time we've seen major sacred gear evolution in the series, it's been triggered by extreme emotional states. But what if instead of the usual power of friendship route, we went dark? What if betrayal by the people he trusted most didn't break Issei, but transformed him into something that could literally absorb and integrate other sacred gears? We're talking divine dividing integration, the ability to steal powers, truth sight that forces people to be honest. This is beyond broken. This is reality warping level insane. So we thought, what if we took this concept and created the ultimate revenge story where Issei becomes powerful enough to make the entire devil political system tremble? Our story follows Issei as he's systematically betrayed by everyone he trusted, falls to rock bottom, gets rescued and trained by Azazel, then returns as the fallen emperor to reshape the supernatural world and show Riaz exactly what she threw away. And trust me, the political intrigue and power dynamics in this one will absolutely blow your mind. If you're ready for an epic tale of betrayal, evolution, and ultimate power, make sure to smash that like button, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell because you do not want to miss this masterpiece. Alright, let's dive into this absolute banger of a story. The grand hall of the Gremory mansion blazed with warm golden light, chandeliers casting dancing shadows across marble floors as laughter and celebration echoed through the air. Devils in formal attire mingled throughout the space, their voices a symphony of congratulations and relief. At the center of it all stood Issei Hyodu, still somewhat bewildered by the attention, a shy smile playing on his lips as various devil nobles approached to praise his victory over Riser Fenix. Incredible work, young Hyodu, proclaimed Lord Fenix himself, his earlier animosity replaced by grudging respect. To think a mere human reincarnate could achieve such power. Issei nodded politely, his eyes automatically seeking out Riaz across the room. She stood near the grand staircase, radiant in a flowing crimson gown that matched her hair, accepting congratulations with the practiced grace of devil nobility. Even from this distance, she took his breath away. The memory of their kiss before the raiding game still burned fresh in his mind, along with her whispered words of gratitude and, could it have been love? Issei-kun, Asia's cheerful voice drew his attention as she approached with a bright smile, her nun's habit replaced by a modest blue dress for the occasion. Everyone's talking about how amazing you were. I'm so proud of you. Thanks, Asia, Issei replied, warmth spreading through his chest. These people, his friends, his family, his beloved Riaz, they were everything to him now. After years of being the school pervert, ignored and mocked, he'd finally found where he belonged. Kiba appeared at his side, immaculate as always in his formal wear. You've truly grown strong, Issei. I'm honored to serve alongside you. The knight's smile seemed genuine, and Issei felt that familiar surge of gratitude for having such loyal friends. We all are, Kaneko added quietly, materializing with her usual cat-like stealth. Even her typically stoic expression seemed softer tonight. You protected everyone. Akino glided over with her characteristic elegant smile, her dark hair styled elaborately for the celebration. Ara, our little pawn has become quite the hero, hasn't he? Riaz, but you must be so proud. At the mention of Riaz, Issei's gaze drifted back to her. She was deep in conversation with her parents now, their expressions serious despite the festive atmosphere. Probably discussing political matters he couldn't understand, the complex world of devil nobility still felt foreign to him. I should go thank her again, Issei murmured, starting to move toward the staircase. Actually, Kiba's hand on his shoulder stopped him. Perhaps we should let Butchu handle family business for now. You know how these political discussions can be. Something in the knight's tone made Issei pause, but he nodded. Yeah, you're probably right. I wouldn't want to interrupt something important. The celebration continued around them, but Issei found himself feeling oddly restless. Despite the praise and attention, something felt off. Maybe it was just the overwhelming nature of it all, or perhaps the lingering adrenaline from the raiding game. I think I need some air, he announced to his friends, just for a few minutes. Of course, Asia said sweetly. We'll be right here when you get back. Issei smiled and began making his way toward the mansion's gardens, nodding politely to the various devils who continued to congratulate him along the way. The sounds of celebration gradually faded as he walked down a side corridor, seeking a quiet balcony or terrace where he could collect his thoughts. It was then that he heard voices coming from a partially open door, familiar voices that made him freeze in place. "I can't believe how well that went," Akino's melodious laugh drifted through the crack. "I almost felt bad about the act sometimes, but orders are orders." Issei's blood went cold. "Act? What act?" "You were particularly convincing with the whole proud senpai routine," Kiba's voice lacking its usual warmth. "I thought the honored to serve alongside you line was a nice touch." "It was all just duty," Kaniko's flat tone carried through the door, "like any other mission." "Oh, come now," Akino chided playfully. "It wasn't that bad. The poor thing was so eager to please, so desperate for acceptance. It made the whole charade rather endearing in a pathetic sort of way." Issei's hand trembled as he reached for the door frame, his legs suddenly feeling weak. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Still, Kiba continued, "I'm glad it's over. Pretending to care about his perverted fantasies was exhausting. At least now we don't have to act like his disgusting habits are charming." SHH, Asia's voice, sweet, innocent Asia, cut through the others. "Someone might hear. We need to maintain appearances until Butchu gives us new orders." The world seemed to tilt around Issei. Asia too, even Asia. "You're right," Akino agreed, "though I must say, seeing his face when he thought we actually cared about him. Did you see how pathetic he looked when he believed someone like Butchu could actually love him?" The cruelest blow came in Ria's own voice, floating clearly through the partially open door with the cold certainty of a death sentence. "The pathetic virgin really thought I could love someone like him. At least the act is over. We got exactly what we needed from him, a useful piece to defeat Riser and secure my freedom from that engagement. Now I can marry for political advantage without that embarrassing complication." Issei's vision blurred, his chest constricting as if someone had wrapped steel cables around his lungs. Every breath became a monumental effort as the words echoed in his mind. Act, charade, pathetic, disgusting. Everything had been a lie. Every smile, every word of encouragement, every moment of supposed friendship or love, all of it calculated, planned, performed. He'd been nothing more than a useful tool, a weapon to be wielded and discarded once his purpose was served. His sacred gear pulsed weakly on his left hand, DxD's presence stirring in what felt like confusion and growing anger. But even his dragon partner felt distant now, as if the revelation had severed connections to everything he'd thought was real. Moving like a man in a trance, Issei turned away from the door. His feet carried him through corridors that suddenly felt like a maze, past celebrating devils who now seemed like strangers wearing familiar masks. The golden light that had seemed so warm moments before now felt harsh and mocking. He needed to leave now, before they realized he'd heard, before they had to continue their act any longer. In the main hall, he spotted Asia by the refreshment table, her innocent smile bright as she chatted with some minor devil nobles. For just a moment, their eyes met across the room. Her expression flickered surprise, then something that might have been guilt, before settling back into that practiced, sweet mask. She'd seen him, she knew he was leaving. But she said nothing, did nothing, just watched with those wide, innocent eyes as he turned away. Issei made his way to a service corridor he'd noticed earlier, avoiding the main entrances where he might be stopped for more congratulations he now knew were empty. His formal jacket, borrowed from the Gremory estate, felt like it was choking him. The devil pieces in his pocket seemed to burn against his leg. In a small storage room, he stripped off everything that marked him as a devil. The jacket, the formal shirt with the Gremory crest, even the shoes they'd provided. He left it all in a neat pile on a shelf, keeping only his basic clothes from underneath. The devil pieces, physical symbols of his reincarnation, his supposed place in their family, he placed carefully beside the discarded finery. Looking at them, he felt nothing but hollow emptiness where love and loyalty used to live. When he emerged from the storage room, it was through a service exit that led to the mansion's rear gardens. The night air hit his face like a physical blow, cold and sharp after the warmth of the celebration. Behind him, he could still hear the sounds of the party continuing, laughter, music, voices raised in toasts to his victory. A victory that meant nothing now, achieved for people who had never cared about him in the first place. Issei walked into the darkness beyond the garden lights, each step taking him further from the golden glow of the mansion and the life he'd thought was his. The shadows seemed to welcome him, offering the only honest thing he'd encountered all evening: darkness that didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. As the sounds of celebration faded behind him, swallowed by the night, Issei Hayaodu disappeared into the void that had always been waiting for him. The pathetic virgin who'd thought he'd found love and family was gone, leaving behind only the echo of cruel laughter and the bitter taste of absolute betrayal. The celebration of lies continued without him, just as it always would have. Just as it always had. 1 week later. The park bench had become Issei's world, cold metal slats that dug into his back, peeling paint that flaked off under his restless fingers, and the perpetual dampness of morning dew that never seemed to fully dry. He'd been moving between 3 different parks in Kyoto, never staying in one place long enough to attract attention, sleeping in shifts when exhaustion finally overwhelmed the churning in his mind. His stomach cramped with hunger, a dull ache he'd grown accustomed to over the past 7 days. The convenience store meals he could afford were sparse, and his appetite had all but disappeared anyway. Food tasted like ash when every bite reminded him of shared lunches with people who'd been acting the entire time. "Issei-kun, you should eat more vegetables," Asia's cheerful voice echoed in his memory, followed immediately by her real words. "We need to maintain appearances until Butchu gives us new orders." The boosted gear pulsed erratically on his left hand, its familiar red glow flickering like a dying light bulb. It had been doing this constantly since that night, activating without warning during the worst moments when the flashbacks hit hardest. Right now it was responding to the memory of Asia's duplicitous smile, power surging uselessly through his system with nowhere to go. "Boost, boost, boost." Partner DxD's voice rumbled weakly in his mind, concern evident even through their telepathic connection. "You need to eat something, you're destroying your body." Issei ignored the dragon just as he'd been doing for days. Even DxD felt tainted now. How could he trust anyone or anything when his entire reality had been a performance? The early morning joggers were starting to appear, their cheerful good mornings grating against his ears as they passed his bench. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that supernatural betrayals could shatter someone so completely. He pulled his hood up higher, avoiding eye contact. "Issei-kun is such a good friend." Kiba's warm laugh from a month ago played in his head, followed immediately by the knight's true voice. Pretending to care about his perverted fantasies was exhausting. The sacred gear pulsed again, harder this time, and Issei felt something crack inside his chest, not physically, but something deeper. The constant activation was starting to hurt, like electricity running through damaged wiring. A mother pushing a stroller walked past, and for a moment she reminded him of how Asia used to fuss over him, always worried about his health and safety. The resemblance triggered another memory flash. "You need to be more careful, Issei-kun. What if you got hurt?" "Then the real Asia, someone might hear. We need to maintain appearances." Transfer. Power surged wildly through the boosted gear, but there was nothing to transfer to, no ally to support. The energy just burned through him uselessly, leaving him shaking and nauseous. "This is not normal activation," DxD's voice carried a note of alarm. "Partner, the gear is responding to your emotional trauma if this continues." "Shut up," Issei whispered hoarsely, his first words in days. His throat felt raw, whether from disuse or from the silent screaming he'd been doing in his head. He stood up from the bench on unsteady legs, joints protesting after hours of sitting in the same position. The world swayed slightly. When was the last time he'd eaten? Yesterday? The day before? Time had become meaningless, marked only by the cycle of painful memories and the burning sensation in his chest. "Ara, our little pawn has become quite the hero, hasn't he?" Akino's sultry voice from the celebration, followed by her real opinion. "Seeing his face when he thought we actually cared about him. How pathetic he looked." The boosted gear flared again, and this time Issei felt something shift inside it. The red glow seemed deeper somehow, tinged with something darker around the edges, but he was too exhausted to care about the implications. He needed to find somewhere more permanent than park benches. Somewhere he could disappear completely, where the memories couldn't find him as easily. The industrial district on the edge of town had plenty of abandoned buildings, places where a broken ex-devil could hide from a world that had never really wanted him. As he walked through the empty streets, each step felt like a monumental effort. His legs had grown weak from poor nutrition and lack of proper rest, but he forced himself to keep moving. Movement was better than stillness. Stillness let the thoughts catch up. The pathetic virgin really thought I could love someone like him. Ria's words hit him like a physical blow, just as devastating as the first time he'd heard them. His knees almost buckled, and the sacred gear responded with another wild surge of power. Boost, 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 transfer. But there was no one to transfer to, no friends to support, no allies to strengthen. The power just burned through him and dissipated into nothing, leaving him more drained than before. Partner, please, DxD's voice was becoming more urgent. You're going to damage both of us if this continues. At least let me help. Help? Issei's laugh came out as a broken rasp, like everyone else helped, like they all cared so much. He stumbled slightly, catching himself against a lamp post. The metal was cold against his palm, solid and real in a way that nothing else seemed to be anymore. For a moment, he just stood there, breathing heavily and trying to center himself. The industrial district wasn't far now. He could see the smokestacks and abandoned warehouses in the distance, dark silhouettes against the gray morning sky. Soon he'd have walls around him, shelter from the world and its lies. I'm so proud of you, Asia's voice bright with false affection. You've truly grown strong, Issei. Kiba's practiced sincerity. We all are, Kaniko's manufactured warmth. Each memory was a knife twist, and with each one, the boosted gear pulsed more erratically. The red glow was definitely changing now, darker veins running through it like cracks in stained glass. By the time he reached the warehouse district, the sun was fully up, casting harsh shadows between the empty buildings. Most of the structures showed signs of abandonment, broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, weeds growing through cracked pavement. He found what he was looking for 3 blocks in, a mid-sized warehouse with an unlocked side door and no recent signs of human activity. Inside, dusty light filtered through dirty skylights, illuminating empty spaces that echoed with his footsteps. It would have to do. Issei collapsed onto the concrete floor in an exhausted heap, finally allowing himself to stop moving. The silence was absolute here, broken only by the distant sounds of the city and his own ragged breathing. For the first time since the betrayal, he was truly alone. No joggers, no concerned strangers, no reminders of the normal world continuing around him. Just emptiness and the growing darkness in his sacred gear. At least the act is over. The words echoed in the empty warehouse as the boosted gear pulsed one more time, its light now noticeably dimmer and tinged with something that looked almost like shadow. Issei closed his eyes and let the abyss finally claim him completely. 3 weeks after the betrayal, the warehouse had become a tomb of broken dreams and shattered trust. Issei claimed the back corner as his territory, where shipping containers created natural walls and the overhead skylights were too dirty to let in much light. A makeshift bed of cardboard and stolen blankets occupied one corner, while the rest of the space had been transformed into something between a training ground and a torture chamber. His body had changed over the past 2 weeks of self-imposed isolation. Where soft flesh had once covered his frame, lean muscle now stretched over prominent ribs. His face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp enough to cut, and his eyes had sunken into dark hollows that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The mirror he'd found in an abandoned office showed a stranger wearing his face, someone harder, more desperate, fundamentally broken. But stronger too, undeniably stronger. Thud, thud, thud. His fists connected with the concrete pillar he'd been using as a punching bag, each impact splitting skin that had already split and healed dozens of times. Blood decorated his knuckles like dark jewelry, but he felt nothing. Physical pain was a mercy compared to the agony that lived in his chest. The boosted gear had been active for the past hour, its glow now predominantly black with only traces of red remaining. The transformation had been gradual but undeniable. With each passing day, each traumatic memory, each moment of absolute despair, the sacred gear had grown darker. Boost, boost, boost. Power surged through his system, but instead of the warm, encouraging energy he remembered, this felt cold and hungry. It devoured his strength, amplified it, and returned it as something else entirely. Something that thrived on pain and betrayal. The pathetic virgin really thought I could love someone like him. The memory hit like it always did, sudden, vicious, precise. Ria's voice, crystal clear in his mind, delivering the killing blow to everything he'd thought was real. His fist connected with the pillar harder, the boosted gear responding to his anguish with another surge of dark power. Partner, DxD's voice was weaker than it had ever been, strained by weeks of this corrupted energy. This isn't training anymore, this is self-destruction. Issei didn't stop punching, couldn't stop. The repetitive motion was the only thing that kept the spiraling thoughts at bay, the only activity that made the endless replay of false memories bearable. I almost felt bad about the act sometimes, but orders are orders. Akino's laugh echoed in the empty warehouse as his knuckles split open again. The pain was immediate and honest, the first honest thing he'd experienced in weeks. "You need to listen to me," DxD continued, his ancient voice carrying notes of genuine concern. "The boosted gear is evolving, but not in any way I've seen before. Your emotional trauma is rewriting its very essence." Thud, thud, thud. Pretending to care about his perverted fantasies was exhausting. Kiba's words, delivered with the knight's characteristic politeness, sent another wave of corrupted power through the sacred gear. This time, Issei felt something shift inside the device, something fundamental and irreversible. "It's responding to your pain," DxD said, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and alarm. "Feeding on it, growing stronger from it. This shouldn't be possible, but..." "But what?" Issei spoke for the first time in days, his voice a harsh rasp that seemed to come from someone else's throat. "But perhaps," the dragon said slowly, "this is what you need to become." Issei's fist froze mid-swing, hovering inches from the blood-stained concrete. "What do you mean?" "The boosted gear has always been powered by the user's desires and ambitions," DxD explained. "Your desire was to protect those you loved, to be worthy of their affection. But now I know it was all lies." The words came out flat, emotionless, but the sacred gear pulsed with dark energy at their utterance. "Exactly, so the gear is adapting, evolving to serve your new truth. That power based on trust is worthless, that strength must come from within, that betrayal can become a weapon stronger than any bond." Issei finally lowered his fist, staring at the black-veined gauntlet that had once been bright red. In the warehouse's dim light, it looked like something forged in darkness itself. It was all just duty, like any other mission. Kaniko's words triggered another evolution spike, and Issei watched in fascination as new patterns of shadow spread across the sacred gear's surface. It was beautiful in a twisted way, like watching something pure become perfectly, intentionally corrupted. "Show me," he whispered. "What?" "Show me what I can become." DxD was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ancient knowledge and terrible possibility. "Very well, partner, but understand, this path leads away from what you were. There will be no going back to the boy who believed in love and friendship." "Good," Issei said and meant it. "That boy was weak, that boy was a fool. Then let us begin your true education." The boosted gear flared with dark energy, and for the first time in weeks, Issei smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression, too sharp, too hungry, too aware of exactly how much pain the world contained. "At least the act is over." Ria's final knife twist echoed through his mind, but this time, instead of agony, it brought clarity. The act was over, indeed. The pathetic, trusting fool they'd used and discarded was gone. What remained was something else entirely, something that understood the true nature of power and had stopped caring about the cost of obtaining it. In the deepest shadows of the abandoned warehouse, something dark and hungry began to take shape. And for the first time since the betrayal, Issei Hyodu felt like he was exactly where he belonged. At rock bottom, there was nowhere to go but up. And when he rose, the world would remember why the Red Dragon Emperor had once been feared across all realms. The question was no longer whether he would survive his fall. The question was whether anyone else would survive his rise. 1 month after the betrayal, the explosion that rocked the abandoned warehouse district at 2 a.m. sent shockwaves through 3 city blocks, shattering windows and triggering car alarms in a symphony of destruction. At the epicenter, what had once been Issei's sanctuary was now a crater of twisted metal and concrete, glowing with residual magical energy that painted the night sky in violent shades of crimson and gold. Issei stood in the center of the devastation, his body wreathed in dark energy that seemed to devour the light around him. The boosted gear had fully evolved now, no longer the familiar red gauntlet, but something that looked like it had been forged in the deepest pits of hell itself. Black metal carved with pulsing red veins covered his entire left arm, extending tendrils of shadow that writhed like living things. Around him lay the broken forms of 6 mid-level devils, their bodies smoking from the corrupted dragon energy that had torn through them like tissue paper. They'd come to capture him. Word had spread through Devil Society about the rogue sacred gear user hiding in the industrial district, and someone had decided he was worth the risk of a retrieval mission. They'd been wrong. Is that all? Issei's voice carried across the smoking ruins, hoarse from weeks of isolation but filled with a cold satisfaction that would have been alien to his former self. 6 devils to capture the pathetic virgin. I'm almost insulted. Boost, 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 divide, absorb. The Sacred Gear's announcement echoed strangely, new functions mixing with the familiar ones. During the fight, it had somehow drained power from his attackers while simultaneously multiplying his own, an impossible combination that should have torn the device apart but instead seemed to make it stronger. Impressive, a new voice cut through the night air, cultured and amused, though I have to say, your technique needs work. Issei spun, the corrupted sacred gear flaring with defensive energy. A figure stepped out of the shadows at the crater's edge, tall, well-dressed, with an aura of casual authority that immediately marked him as someone far more dangerous than the devils who now decorated the rubble. Azazel, Governor General of the Fallen Angels, looked exactly like someone who'd been watching this destruction unfold with professional interest. Stay back, Issei snarled, power crackling around him like black lightning. I don't care what you are, I'm done being used by anyone. Oh, I'm not here to use you, Azazel said, stepping casually over a chunk of concrete that had once been part of the warehouse wall. Well, not exactly, I'm here to make you an offer. I said stay back. Dark energy erupted from the boosted gear, tearing through the air where Azazel had been standing. But the fallen angel was no longer there. He'd moved with casual grace to another position, completely untouched by the attack that could have leveled a building. Temper, temper, Azazel chided, brushing imaginary dust from his coat. Though I have to admit, that's quite the evolution you've achieved. DxD must be having quite the identity crisis. At the mention of the dragon's name, Issei's eyes widened. How do you know about your situation, please? Azazel waved a hand dismissively. I've been monitoring devil politics for centuries. Did you really think Ria's Gremory's little arranged marriage scheme would escape my notice, especially when it involved disposing of such a promising sacred gear user? The words hit Issei like physical blows. You knew. Of course I knew. The Gremory family has been planning that political marriage for months. Using you as a disposable weapon to defeat Riser was elegant, if ruthlessly cruel. Azazel's expression grew serious. What I didn't expect was for you to survive the betrayal with your sanity intact. Most humans would have simply broken. Who says I haven't broken? Issei's laugh was bitter and sharp. Look around you. Does this look like sanity to you? This looks like evolution, Azazel corrected, gesturing at the destruction. You've taken your pain and forged it into power. That's not insanity, that's adaptation. Another wave of fallen angels materialized from the shadows, a dozen of them, all armed and clearly prepared for a fight. Issei's corrupted sacred gear flared in response, ready to add them to the body count. Now, Azazel raised a hand and his followers immediately stopped their advance. We're not here to fight, we're here to extend an invitation. I don't want your pity, Issei spat, but something in the fallen angel's tone made him hesitate. Good, because I'm not offering any. Pity is for the weak, and whatever else you might be, you're clearly not that anymore. Azazel moved closer, seemingly oblivious to the dangerous energy crackling around Issei. What I'm offering is honesty, something I suspect you haven't had in quite some time. The word honesty cut through Issei's defenses like a blade. After weeks of reliving every lie, every false smile, every moment of calculated deception, the promise of truth was almost physically painful. Everyone lies, he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Yes, they do, Azazel agreed readily, including me, but I'll tell you exactly what my lies are and why I'm telling them. That's more than the devils ever gave you, isn't it? Issei stared at the fallen angel, searching for any sign of deception. But there was something different about Azazel's demeanor, a casual honesty that felt nothing like the calculated performances he'd endured from his former peerage. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. "I want to train you," Azazel said simply. "I want to take that remarkable evolution you've achieved and help you refine it into something truly extraordinary. And yes, I want to use your power for my own purposes, specifically as a weapon against the devil political system that created this situation in the first place." The honesty was startling in its directness. No pretty lies about friendship or family, no manipulative appeals to his emotions, just a straightforward transaction. "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't," Azazel replied immediately. "Trust is what got you into this mess in the first place. But I'm offering you something better than trust. I'm offering you power, knowledge, and the tools to make sure no one can use you like that again." The boosted gear pulsed, and Issei felt DxD stirring with interest for the first time in days. "He speaks truth, partner," the dragon's voice was thoughtful. "Not complete truth, but far more than you've heard in weeks. And he's right about one thing: you need training to control what you've become." Issei looked around at the devastation he'd wrought, at the broken bodies of devils who'd thought him easy prey, at the smoking crater that had once been his refuge. The power felt good, intoxicating even, but it was still raw and unfocused. "What's the catch?" he asked. Azazel smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. "The catch is that once you start down this path, there's no going back to being the trusting fool you used to be. You'll become something harder, stronger, more dangerous, but also more isolated. The boy who believed in love and friendship will die permanently." "Good," Issei said without hesitation. He was weak. "Then we understand each other." Azazel extended a hand. "Come with me, Issei Hyodu. Let me show you what you can become when you stop believing in other people's lies and start embracing your own power." Issei stared at the offered hand for a long moment. Everything in him screamed to reject it, to retreat back into isolation where no one could hurt him again. But the fallen angel was right. He needed training, direction, focus. And most importantly, he needed to become strong enough that no one could ever use him again. "I want one thing clear," Issei said, his voice carrying the cold finality of absolute conviction. "This is a transaction. You train me, I become your weapon, but I owe you nothing beyond that. No loyalty, no friendship, no trust, just power." "Perfect," Azazel said, his smile widening. "That's exactly the attitude that will keep you alive in this world." Issei reached out and grasped the fallen angel's hand, sealing a bargain that would reshape the supernatural world. Behind them, the warehouse district continued to burn, the flames painting the night sky in shades of ending and beginning. The weak boy who had believed in love was truly dead now. What rose from his ashes would be something entirely different. Something the world would learn to fear. The fallen angel's stronghold hidden beneath Mount Fuji was nothing like what Issei had expected. Where he'd imagined Gothic spires and hellish architecture, he found instead a sophisticated research facility that looked more like a high-tech university than a supernatural fortress. Clean white corridors lined with observation windows revealed laboratories filled with equipment he couldn't begin to identify, while the living quarters maintained a minimalist aesthetic that spoke of function over form. "Welcome to my little project," Azazel said, leading Issei through the main corridor. "We've been studying sacred gears here for over 2 centuries, trying to understand what makes them tick. You, my friend, represent a rather unique data point." Issei said nothing, his eyes taking in everything with the paranoid intensity he'd developed over the past month. Every fallen angel they passed received the same scrutinizing stare, every doorway was cataloged as a potential escape route, every shadow was examined for hidden threats. "Relax," Azazel chuckled, nodding his tension. "No one here is going to betray you, mainly because none of them particularly care about you as a person." The brutal honesty was somehow more reassuring than any promise of friendship would have been. Issei felt some of the rigid tension in his shoulders ease slightly. "This is your room." Azazel stopped before a simple door marked only with a number. "Basic accommodations, bed, desk, private bathroom. No locks, because if you want to leave, you're free to do so at any time." Issei tested the door handle, finding it turned smoothly. Inside was exactly what had been promised: functional furniture, clean linens, and a window that looked out over an underground cavern filled with bioluminescent plants. It was more luxury than he'd had in weeks. "Why?" he asked, suspicious of the apparent generosity. Because comfort makes for better research subjects, Azazel replied without missing a beat. A stressed, paranoid, malnourished test subject gives inconsistent data. A well-rested, properly fed one provides much better results. Again, the clinical honesty cut through Issei's defenses more effectively than any emotional appeal. He was being treated as exactly what he was, a research project with human needs that had to be met for optimal performance. Dinner is in an hour, Azazel continued. I suggest you eat. Your body mass has dropped nearly 15% since the betrayal, and malnutrition will interfere with sacred gear development. Issei's stomach cramped at the mention of food, reminding him that his last meal had been a stale convenience store sandwich 2 days ago. But the idea of sitting at a table with strangers, of pretending to be social, made his skin crawl. I'll eat in my room. No, you won't, Azazel said firmly. Part of your recovery involves relearning how to function around other people. You can hate them, distrust them, plan their deaths if it makes you feel better, but you will learn to interact with them without having a complete breakdown. I don't have breakdowns, Issei snarled, the boosted gear flickering to life on his arm. Really? Azazel raised an eyebrow. Because 3 hours ago you destroyed half an industrial district because 6 mid-level devils looked at you wrong. That sounds like a breakdown to me. The words stung because they were accurate. Issei's control had been non-existent during that fight, pure emotion and corrupted power with no technique or strategy behind it. He'd won through raw force alone, and against stronger opponents, that wouldn't be enough. Fine, he said through gritted teeth, but I'm not making friends. I wouldn't dream of asking you to, Azazel smiled. Friendship requires trust, and trust requires vulnerability. You're far too smart to be vulnerable again. The fallen angel left him alone after that, giving Issei time to examine his new surroundings more thoroughly. The room was indeed simple but comfortable, with what felt like genuine privacy. The shower had unlimited hot water, a luxury he hadn't experienced in weeks, and the closet contained fresh clothes in his exact size. Even the gesture of providing properly fitted clothing felt calculated rather than caring, which somehow made it more acceptable. They needed him to look presentable for their research. It was transaction, not charity. When the dinner hour arrived, Issei forced himself to leave the room and follow the corridors toward what his nose identified as a cafeteria. The smell of actual cooked food made his mouth water involuntarily, reminding him just how long it had been since he'd eaten a proper meal. The dining area was larger than expected, filled with perhaps 24 fallen angels of various ranks. Conversations died as he entered, every pair of eyes turning to examine the newcomer with clinical interest. There was no hostility in their gazes, but no warmth either, just the detached curiosity of researchers observing a test subject. That's him, one whispered to her companion, the sacred gear evolution. Look at his arm, the corruption patterns are fascinating. I heard he killed 6 devils without breaking a sweat. Issei's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to walk to the serving line and accept a tray of food. The cafeteria worker, a middle-aged fallen angel with tired eyes, served him without comment or false pleasantries, which he found oddly refreshing. He chose a table in the corner, positioning himself with his back to the wall and clear sight lines to all entrances. The food was better than anything he'd eaten in months, real meat, fresh vegetables, bread that wasn't stale. His starved body responded eagerly, even as his mind remained hypervigilant. Mind if I sit? The voice belonged to a fallen angel who looked barely older than himself, with short black hair and a casual demeanor that immediately put Issei on edge. Anyone trying to appear friendly was automatically suspect. Yes, I mind, Issei replied without looking up from his meal. Perfect, the fallen angel sat down anyway, setting his tray across from Issei's. I'm Barakil, I'll be helping with your combat training. Issei finally looked up, taking in the younger-looking fallen angel's relaxed posture and genuine smile. I said I minded. I heard you, but Azazel's orders were to get you acclimated to social interaction, and ignoring your preferences is part of that process. Barakil took a bite of his food, completely unfazed by Issei's obvious hostility. Besides, I have some information you'll want to hear. Despite himself, Issei's attention sharpened. What kind of information? About your former friends, what they've been up to since you disappeared. The boosted gear pulsed with dark energy, responding to the spike of emotion that mention of his betrayers triggered. Several nearby fallen angels glanced over with interest, nodding the reaction. "I don't care what they're doing," Issei lied. "Sure you don't? That's why your sacred gear just tried to set the table on fire." Barakiel's smile never wavered. "They've been looking for you, by the way, very publicly, with lots of dramatic speeches about how worried they are and how they want to bring their friend home." The words hit like physical blows, triggering a cascade of flashback memories. Every moment of false concern, every lie wrapped in caring words, every manipulative performance designed to keep him compliant and useful. "What if you got hurt? We're so worried about you. Come home, Issei-kun." "More acting," he whispered, his voice carrying the venom of absolute hatred. "Exactly," Barakiel agreed cheerfully. "Public relations. They need to look like they care, especially with Devil Society asking uncomfortable questions about how they managed to lose such a powerful sacred gear user right after he served his purpose." The clinical assessment helped ground Issei, pulling him back from the edge of another emotional spiral. These weren't friends worried about his well-being, they were politicians managing a scandal. "How do you know all this?" he asked. "Because we have spies in Devil Society, obviously. Information is power, and power is what this is all about." Barakiel's honesty was as casual as his smile. "Azazel wants you to understand exactly what you're dealing with so you can make informed decisions about your future." "My future?" Issei repeated, tasting the words. For weeks, he'd been focused entirely on survival, on the immediate moment and the immediate pain. The idea that he might have a future beyond revenge felt alien. "You have options," Barakiel continued. "You can go back to them, pretend to forgive and forget, return to being their useful pet. You can disappear entirely, find some remote corner of the world and hide from supernatural politics forever. Or you can become strong enough that it doesn't matter what they want, strong enough to dictate terms instead of accepting them, strong enough to make them afraid of you instead of the other way around." The third option resonated with something deep in Issei's chest, a hunger that had been growing stronger with each passing day. Not just for revenge, but for the kind of power that made revenge unnecessary, the kind of strength that meant no one could ever use him again. "That's what this is about, isn't it?" he said slowly. "Making me stronger." "Among other things," Barakiel agreed. "Azazel has his own agenda, naturally. But part of that agenda involves you becoming powerful enough to reshape the supernatural world's political landscape. It's mutually beneficial." For the first time in weeks, Issei felt something other than pain or rage. Not hope, he was too broken for that, but possibility. The chance to become something more than a victim, more than a discarded tool, more than the pathetic virgin who'd believed in love. "When do we start?" he asked. Barakiel's smile widened into something sharp and anticipatory. "Tomorrow morning, and fair warning, the training is going to hurt. A lot. We're not just building your power, we're rebuilding you from the ground up." "Good," Issei said and meant it. "I want it to hurt. The boy I used to be needs to die completely." "Oh, he's already dead," Barakiel assured him. "What we're doing now is forging something new from his ashes, something harder, something stronger. Something that would never be betrayed again." As Issei finished his meal in companionable silence with a fallen angel who'd been honest about wanting to use him, he felt the first stirrings of something he'd thought was gone forever. Not trust, exactly, but the possibility that not everyone in the world was his enemy. Some of them just wanted to reshape him into a weapon. And for the first time since the betrayal, that felt like exactly what he needed. 2 weeks into training. The underground training facility bore the scars of Issei's education in violence. Massive craters punctured the reinforced concrete floor, scorch marks painted abstract patterns across the walls, and the smell of ozone and burnt metal hung heavy in the recycled air. What had once been a pristine research space now looked like a battlefield where gods had fought and left their marks. Issei stood in the center of the devastation, his body gleaming with sweat and dark energy that writhed around him like living shadow. The boosted gear had evolved again during the past fortnight of brutal training, growing from a simple gauntlet into something that covered his entire left arm and shoulder. Black metal carved with pulsing red veins extended tendrils of corrupted power that responded to his emotions like extensions of his nervous system. But today was different. Today, something fundamental had shifted. Again, Barakiel called from his position across the training ground, his own power crackling around him in controlled bursts of lightning. And this time, don't just boost your own power, try to take mine. The concept should have been impossible. The boosted gear multiplied the user's abilities, while Divine Dividing halved the opponent's power and absorbed it. Two completely incompatible functions that had never existed in the same sacred gear. Yet as Issei faced his trainer, he could feel both possibilities humming in the corrupted device on his arm. How, he asked, his voice hoarse from 2 hours of continuous combat. Stop thinking like a devil, Barakiel replied, settling into a combat stance. Devils follow rules, respect limitations, accept that sacred gears have defined functions. But you're not a devil anymore, are you? The words triggered a familiar surge of bitter satisfaction. No, he wasn't a devil anymore. He'd abandoned those pieces in a storage room weeks ago, along with everything else that had defined his old life. Then what am I? Something new, Azazel's voice carried across the training ground as the Governor General entered through the observation deck. Something that shouldn't exist according to conventional wisdom, which makes you very interesting indeed. Issei turned to acknowledge his primary mentor, nodding the excitement in the fallen angel's eyes. Over the past 2 weeks, that look had become familiar, the expression of a researcher witnessing impossible data, a scientist watching his theories shatter and reform in real time. The sacred gear is evolving beyond its original parameters, Azazel continued, descending to the training floor with casual grace. Your emotional trauma created a cascade failure in its base programming, allowing functions that should be mutually exclusive to coexist in the same system. In terms I can understand, Issei asked dryly. Your pain broke your sacred gear so thoroughly that it's rebuilding itself from scratch, Barakiel translated with a grin, and apparently the new version doesn't care about the rules. Boost, 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 divide, absorb, transfer. The announcements echoed strangely in the training ground, overlapping functions that created new possibilities. Issei felt the power building in his corrupted sacred gear, but this time it felt different, not just his own energy multiplying, but something else flowing into the system from outside. That's it, Azazel breathed, his scientific excitement barely contained. You're not just boosting your power, you're stealing Barakiel's lightning and adding it to your own energy pool. The realization hit Issei like a physical blow. During their sparring sessions, he'd been unconsciously draining his opponent's abilities while simultaneously multiplying his own. An impossible combination that should have torn the sacred gear apart. Show me, he said, his voice carrying new conviction. Barakiel nodded and unleashed a massive bolt of divine lightning, the kind of attack that could level city blocks. But instead of dodging or blocking, Issei reached out with his corrupted sacred gear and pulled. The lightning struck the black metal of his evolved, boosted gear and simply disappeared, not deflected or absorbed in the traditional sense, but consumed and integrated into his own power matrix. He felt Barakiel's divine energy mixing with his draconic power, creating something that was neither but somehow both. Divine lightning integration complete. Boost, boost, boost. When Issei struck back, his attack carried the combined force of his multiplied strength and Barakiel's stolen lightning, wrapped in the corrupted energy of his trauma-evolved sacred gear. The result was devastating, a beam of dark power traced with divine electricity that tore through the reinforced training dummy and carved a molten channel through the wall behind it. Magnificent, Azazel whispered, his eyes shining with the fervor of discovery. You're not just using multiple sacred gear functions, you're creating entirely new ones. This is evolution in action. Issei stared at his transformed arm, watching the stolen lightning crackle through the black metal veins like captured starlight. For the first time since the betrayal, he felt something other than pain or rage. He felt possibility. What else can I do? He asked. That's what we're here to discover, Azazel replied, already moving toward the equipment lockers. But first, we need to test your limits. Barakiel, summon the others. I want to see how this new integration ability performs against multiple opponents. Over the next hour, Issei found himself facing increasingly challenging scenarios. 3 fallen angels attacking in coordination, 5 opponents with different power types, a mechanized defense system that fired energy blasts faster than human reflexes could track. Each challenge revealed new capabilities, Against the coordinated fallen angels, his sacred gear learned to steal and redistribute their powers, turning their teamwork against them. The varied power types taught him to integrate incompatible energies, creating hybrid attacks that no opponent could predict or counter. The mechanized system showed him how to absorb and redirect pure energy without a conscious mind behind it. By the end of the session, Issei's sacred gear had evolved once again. The black metal now covered most of his torso, forming armor that pulsed with absorbed energies from a dozen different sources. Tendrils of corrupted power extended from the main structure, moving independently to intercept attacks or channel stolen abilities. Fascinating, Azazel murmured, taking readings from various instruments. The device is no longer just a sacred gear, it's becoming something entirely unprecedented. A parasitic system that grows stronger by consuming other powers. Is that what I am now? Issei asked, examining the dark armor that had grown to cover his chest and shoulders. A parasite. You're an evolution, Azazel corrected. The next step in sacred gear development, born from circumstances so extreme that conventional limitations simply stopped applying. The clinical assessment felt right in a way that emotional comfort never could have. Issei wasn't healing from his betrayal, he was growing beyond it, becoming something that couldn't be hurt by false promises or manipulative lies. What's next? He asked. Next, we test you against real enemies, Azazel said, his expression growing serious. There are factions in Devil Society that have been asking uncomfortable questions about your disappearance. Some of them have decided that a rogue sacred gear user represents too much of a security risk to leave alone. They're coming for me. They've already tried once with those 6 devils you killed at the warehouse, but that was just a probe, a test to see what you'd become. The next attempt will be more serious. Issei felt the corrupted sacred gear pulse with anticipation at the thought of stronger opponents. The device, no, the system that he'd become, hungered for new powers to consume, new abilities to integrate. Let them come, he said, his voice carrying the cold confidence of someone who'd stopped fearing loss because he'd already lost everything that mattered. I'll show them what their betrayal created. Barakiel laughed, the sound carrying genuine admiration. Now that's the attitude we've been waiting for. The victim who begged for scraps of affection is gone. What's left is something that takes what it wants. As Issei looked at his reflection in the polished metal of the training equipment, he barely recognized the figure staring back. Gone was the eager, desperate boy who'd thrown himself into every battle to prove his worth to people who'd never cared. In his place stood something harder, hungrier, infinitely more dangerous. The fallen emperor was taking shape, forged in betrayal and tempered in the fires of absolute loss. Soon, very soon, the world would learn what happened when you broke someone so completely that they stopped caring about the rules. And when that day came, Ria's grummery and her peerage would understand exactly what they'd created in their moment of casual cruelty. Something that would reshape the supernatural world to ensure that no one could ever be used and discarded like he had been. Something that would make them all remember why the Red Dragon Emperor had once been feared across every realm of existence. The training was complete, now came the real test. Now came the war. 1 month after beginning Fallen Angel training. The War Council chamber deep within Azazel's stronghold had been transformed into something resembling a supernatural intelligence center. Multiple screens displayed real-time information feeds from across the 3 factions, Devil territory movements, Angel patrol routes, and Fallen Angel reconnaissance reports created a constantly shifting map of supernatural politics in motion. Issei stood before the central display, his evolved sacred gear casting eerie shadows across the high-tech equipment. The armor now covered most of his upper body, black metal interwoven with veins of stolen power that pulsed with absorbed energies from dozens of different sources. Each training session, each battle, each moment of controlled violence had added new capabilities to what was no longer merely a sacred gear, but something approaching a living weapon system. Your education in supernatural politics begins now, Azazel announced, manipulating the display to show a detailed breakdown of Devil Society's power structure. And I'm afraid you're not going to like what you learn. Family trees, political alliances, and economic relationships spread across the screen in a web of complexity that made Issei's head spin. At the center of it all sat the major devil houses, Gremory, Phoenix, Citri, Astaroth, connected by lines that represented marriages, treaties, and mutual obligations. The marriage arrangement between Riaz and Riser wasn't just about their personal compatibility, Azazel continued, highlighting specific connections. It was about consolidating power between two of the most influential devil houses, creating a political bloc that could challenge the current Satan-class leadership. Issei's jaw clenched as the implications became clear. So I really was just a tool, a weapon to clear the way for their real plans. Worse than that, Barakil added, entering the chamber with a stack of intelligence reports. You were always meant to be temporary. The moment Riaz defeated Riser using your power, the engagement would be broken, you'd be discarded, and she'd be free to marry someone more politically advantageous. The boosted gear pulsed with dark energy as anger surged through Issei's system. But this wasn't the wild, uncontrolled rage of his early days. This was cold, focused fury that the corrupted sacred gear channeled into precise increases in power. Emotional integration, rage coefficient optimized, boost, boost, boost. Show me the rest, Issei said, his voice carrying the deadly calm he'd learned during weeks of combat training. Azazel's fingers danced across the control interface, bringing up new displays. Your reincarnation wasn't random chance either. Riaz had been monitoring potential sacred gear users in Cute City for months before Rainer killed you. When you died, she was ready, resurrection, binding to her peerage, and immediate integration into her plans. The screen showed surveillance photos of himself from before his death, walking to school, buying porn magazines, getting beaten up by Calawarner. Every moment of his human life had been watched, catalogued, evaluated for potential usefulness. They studied me, he whispered, the words carrying a mixture of horror and rage, like a lab rat. Devils are nothing if not thorough in their preparations, Azazel confirmed. But here's what they didn't expect, your emotional capacity. Most sacred gear users they recruit are either already broken or easily manipulated. You, however, had an almost infinite capacity for loyalty and affection. It made you incredibly powerful and incredibly vulnerable. New files opened, showing psychological profiles that made Issei's skin crawl. Subject shows strong attachment responses. Recommend exploitation of abandonment fears to ensure compliance. Positive reinforcement through false affection proves highly effective. They knew exactly how to manipulate me, he said, his voice flat with the realization. Of course they did. The Gremory family has been playing these games for centuries. They've refined emotional manipulation into an art form. Azazel paused the display on a particularly damning document. This is Riaz's personal analysis of your psychological weaknesses, written 3 days after your reincarnation. Issei read the clinical assessment of his desperate need for acceptance, his willingness to sacrifice himself for others' approval, his pathetic gratitude for even the smallest scraps of affection. Seeing his vulnerability laid out in cold, analytical terms was somehow worse than remembering the betrayal itself. Why are you showing me this? He asked. Because you need to understand the scope of what you're dealing with, Azazel replied seriously. This isn't just about one devil family's political maneuvering. This is about a system that treats sacred gear users as disposable resources to be used up and discarded when convenient. The display shifted to show other cases, sacred gear users who'd been recruited, exploited, and eventually eliminated when they became inconvenient. Dozens of them across the past century, all following similar patterns. The boy who died in that park wasn't the first casualty of devil politics, Barakil said grimly, and if we don't change the system, he won't be the last. Issei felt something crystallize in his chest, not just personal rage anymore, but something larger and more focused. Justice, perhaps, or at least the desire to ensure that no one else suffered what he had endured. What about the others? He asked. My former peerage members, were they in on it from the beginning? That's more complicated, Azazel admitted, bringing up individual profiles. Asia was genuinely ignorant of the larger plan, but she chose compliance over resistance when the truth became clear. Kiba and Aquino knew they were participating in deception, but convinced themselves it was for the greater good. Kaneko, she simply followed orders without questioning their morality. Each revelation was another nail in the coffin of his former life. Even Asia, sweet, innocent Asia who he'd thought might have genuinely cared, had chosen the easy path of going along with the lie rather than standing up for what was right. And Riaz, he asked, though he dreaded the answer. Riaz was the architect, Azazel said bluntly. Every false smile, every manipulative gesture, every moment of calculated affection, it was all part of her plan. She needed you emotionally dependent to ensure maximum loyalty and power output. The clinical assessment hit harder than physical blows. The girl he'd loved, the woman he'd have died for without hesitation, had never seen him as anything more than a useful tool to be maintained through psychological conditioning. Truth Sight activating, analyzing historical data. The new ability that had been developing during his training suddenly flared to life, flooding his mind with perfect clarity about every interaction he'd had with his former peerage. Every smile that hadn't reached the eyes, every gesture of affection that had carried the practiced precision of someone following a script, every moment of supposed spontaneous care that had actually been carefully calculated. The truth was worse than the betrayal. The betrayal had at least been honest in its cruelty. "I can see it now," he said, his voice carrying the weight of terrible understanding. "Every lie, every manipulation, every moment they were acting, it's all so clear." Truth Sight is one of the most painful abilities you'll develop, Azazel warned. The capacity to see through deception is a double-edged sword. You'll never be fooled again, but you'll also never be able to believe in comfortable illusions. Issei tested the ability, focusing on Azazel himself. Immediately, he could perceive the layers of the fallen angel's motivations, genuine scientific fascination with his evolution, political calculations about his usefulness as a weapon, and underneath it all, something that might have been actual concern for his well-being. "You do care," he said, surprised. "Not much, and not in any way that would stop you from using me, but there's actual concern there." "I told you I'd be honest about my lies," Azazel replied with a slight smile. "Part of effective manipulation is allowing some genuine emotion to show through. But yes, in my own way, I've become invested in your success." The admission was strangely comforting, not because it represented friendship, Issei was too broken for that, but because it was honest. A genuine emotional response acknowledged and integrated into a larger strategic framework. "What's the next step?" he asked. "Now we test whether your new abilities can handle real opposition," Azazel said, the display shifting to show current intelligence reports. "3 separate devil factions have decided you represent too much of a security risk to leave alone. They're coordinating a joint operation to either capture or eliminate you. Within the week, and they're not sending low-level scouts this time. We're talking about high-class devils with centuries of combat experience and political backing." Issei felt the corrupted sacred gear pulse with anticipation. The system had been hungry for stronger opponents, more powerful abilities to absorb and integrate. This would be the perfect testing ground. "Good," he said, his voice carrying the cold satisfaction of someone who'd found their purpose. "I want them to come. I want them to see what their political games created." "Just remember," Barakil warned, "this isn't about revenge anymore. This is about reshaping the supernatural world to prevent future victims. Personal satisfaction is secondary to systemic change." "I understand," Issei replied, and he did. The boy who'd wanted nothing more than the approval of people who'd never cared was gone. What remained was something with a larger vision, not just personal vengeance, but the destruction of a system that treated sacred gear users as disposable tools. As he stared at the displays showing the vast web of devil politics, Issei felt the final pieces of his transformation clicking into place. He wasn't just becoming stronger, he was becoming something that could challenge the fundamental assumptions of supernatural society. Soon, very soon, he would return to the world that had discarded him, but when he did, it wouldn't be as the broken boy seeking acceptance. It would be as the fallen emperor, carrying the power to remake the world in his own image. And the first lesson that world would learn was simple. Those who treated others as disposable tools would discover what it felt like to be used and discarded in return. The education was complete. Now came the final examination. 6 weeks after the betrayal, the Q Academy Gymnasium had been transformed into a neutral meeting ground for what the supernatural community was calling the most significant political gathering in decades. Devils, angels, and fallen angels mingled in carefully choreographed groups, their conversations carrying the weight of potential treaties and ancient grudges. At the center of it all, the topic everyone whispered about but few dared discuss openly: the disappearance of Issei Hayaodu and the growing instability in devil political structures. Ria's gremmerie stood near the elevated platform where the evening's formal presentations would take place, her crimson hair catching the gymnasium's harsh fluorescent lighting. She maintained the practiced smile of devil nobility, accepting condolences and concern from various faction representatives with appropriate grace. But those who knew her well could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes constantly scanned the crowd as if expecting a ghost to materialize from the shadows. "Any word from your search teams?" Sona Citri asked quietly, approaching with the measured steps of someone navigating dangerous political waters. "Nothing concrete," Riaz replied, her voice carefully neutral. "There was some disturbance in the industrial district weeks ago, but by the time our people arrived, there was nothing left but rubble." What she didn't mention was the intelligence reports that had been trickling in from various sources. Whispers of a rogue sacred gear user training with fallen angels, rumors of impossible power evolutions, stories that sounded too extreme to be credible but came from too many independent sources to dismiss entirely. Across the gymnasium, her peerage maintained their own careful facades. Asia spoke softly with some angel representatives, her nun's training serving her well in diplomatic settings. Hiba charmed a group of minor devil nobles with his characteristic politeness. Aquino exchanged pleasantries with fallen angel diplomats, her smile never wavering despite the growing tension in the air. Haniko remained silent and observant, positioned where she could monitor multiple exit points. All of them maintained the public fiction that they were simply concerned friends hopping for their missing comrade's safe return. None of them acknowledged the growing fear that lived in their chests, the knowledge that what they'd done might have consequences they hadn't anticipated. The first sign that the evening would not proceed according to plan came when the temperature in the gymnasium began to drop. Not dramatically, but enough that conversations faltered as supernatural beings with enhanced senses noticed the change. A subtle pressure filled the air, the kind that preceded major magical manifestations. Then the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the gymnasium in an eerie red glow that transformed familiar faces into demonic shadows. But instead of panic, an expectant hush fell over the assembled crowd. This wasn't a technical malfunction, this was a statement. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice cut through the silence, amplified by some invisible force that made it seem to come from everywhere at once. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but I wanted to ensure I had everyone's undivided attention." The voice was familiar to 4 individuals in the crowd, but changed in ways that made their blood run cold. Where once it had carried eager enthusiasm and desperate hope, now it held the controlled confidence of someone who'd learned to weaponize their pain. A figure stepped out of the shadows at the far end of the gymnasium, and collective gasps rippled through the assembled supernatural community. The boy who disappeared weeks ago was gone, replaced by something that looked like he'd been forged in darkness itself. Issei Hayaudu, though the name no longer seemed adequate, stood before them transformed beyond recognition. His once soft frame had been sculpted into lean muscle that spoke of relentless training and absolute focus. His face, gaunt with sharp cheekbones and hollow eyes, carried the cold beauty of someone who'd been broken and reforged in fire. But most striking was the armor that covered his torso and left arm, black metal carved with pulsing red veins that seemed to move independently, tendrils of corrupted power writhing around him like living shadows. "Hello, Riaz," he said, his voice carrying across the silent gymnasium with perfect clarity. "I hope you don't mind that I wasn't invited to your little gathering. I thought it was time we had a conversation." Riaz felt her knees go weak, a mixture of fear and something else, something that felt disturbingly like attraction, flooding her system. This wasn't the eager boy who'd hung on her every word. This was something dangerous, powerful, magnificently terrible in ways that made her devil instincts sing with recognition. "Issei," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where have you been? We've been so worried." "Have you?" The question cut through her attempted performance with surgical precision. "How interesting. Because I've been learning some fascinating things about devil politics, about arranged marriages, about how sacred gear users are recruited, manipulated, and discarded when convenient." The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Around the gymnasium, supernatural politicians began to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented, not just a powerful individual making an entrance, but a potential reshaping of the entire political landscape. "I don't know what you've been told," Riaz began, falling back on damage control protocols, "but if someone has been filling your head with lies." Lies. Issei's laugh was sharp and bitter. Oh, Riaz, sweet, manipulative Riaz, I've developed a very interesting ability recently. Would you like to see it? Without waiting for an answer, his evolved sacred gear pulsed with energy, and suddenly his eyes began to glow with an inner light that seemed to pierce through shadows and deception alike. Truth sight activated, analyzing current statements. Let's try this again, he said, his glowing gaze fixed on her face. Tell me how worried you've been about my disappearance. Riaz opened her mouth to repeat her practiced concern, but the words died in her throat. Under the influence of his truth sight, she could feel her ability to lie simply, failing. The false expressions of care, the manipulative gestures of affection, the entire performance she'd perfected over years of devil politics. All of it became impossible under that terrible, knowing stare. She struggled, genuine panic creeping into her voice. I can't. How are you doing this? Pain is an excellent teacher, Issei replied conversationally. And betrayal is an even better one. When you break someone so completely that they stop believing in comfortable illusions, interesting things happen to their abilities. He turned his glowing gaze to the rest of his former peerage, and each of them felt the same crushing inability to maintain their facades. Asia's innocent smile crumbled, replaced by obvious guilt. Kiba's practiced charm faltered, revealing the calculating assessment underneath. Akino's sultry confidence evaporated, leaving her looking genuinely uncertain for the first time in decades. Haniko simply stared back with the stoic acceptance of someone who never bothered with elaborate deceptions. Now then, Issei continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who held all the cards. Let's have an honest conversation. Riaz, would you like to explain to this distinguished gathering exactly why you recruited me, what my real purpose was in your plans? The gymnasium had fallen completely silent, every supernatural being present recognizing that they were witnessing a moment that would reshape their world. Treaties could be negotiated, wars could be fought, but this was the birth of something entirely new. Riaz looked around desperately, seeking support from her allies, escape routes, anything that might save her from this moment of absolute exposure. But under the influence of truth sight, even her political instincts felt muted and uncertain. She began, then stopped, trying to find words that were both honest and survivable. You were recruited because of your sacred gear, because we needed power to break my engagement to Riser. And after that, Issei pressed, his voice carrying the implacable force of someone who would accept nothing less than complete honesty. After that, the words came out in a whisper, torn from her throat by forces she couldn't resist. After that, you would have been reassigned to other duties, while I pursued more politically advantageous marriage options. The admission hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow. Gasps, murmurs, and sharp intakes of breath rippled through the gymnasium as supernatural politicians processed what they'd just heard, a confession of manipulation so blatant that it challenged the carefully maintained fiction of devil nobility. Reassigned, Issei repeated, tasting the euphemism. Such a polite way to say discarded like a used tool, but at least we're being honest now. He began to walk forward, his corrupted sacred gear casting writhing shadows that seemed to reach for his former friends with hungry intent. With each step, the pressure in the gymnasium increased, power radiating from him in waves that made even high-class devils step back nervously. The question is, he continued, his voice carrying across the silent space, what do we do now? Now that everyone understands exactly what devil politics really looks like behind the pretty speeches and formal treaties. As he approached the platform where Riaz stood frozen in horrified fascination, Issei felt the final pieces of his transformation clicking into place. The broken boy who'd begged for scraps of affection was truly dead now. What remained was something that could reshape the supernatural world through pure force of will and the terrible clarity that came from having nothing left to lose. The fallen emperor had returned to claim his throne. And the first lesson he would teach was simple. Those who treated others as disposable tools would learn what it felt like to be at the mercy of something infinitely more dangerous than their political games. The real conversation was just beginning. The silence in the gymnasium stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Every supernatural being present understood they were witnessing history in the making, not just a personal confrontation, but the potential birth of a new power structure that could reshape their entire world. Issei stood before the elevated platform where Riaz remained frozen, his corrupted sacred gear casting writhing shadows that seemed to reach for her with predatory hunger. The black armor pulsed with absorbed energies from dozens of sources, each pulse a reminder of just how far he'd evolved beyond the broken boy who'd fled into the night weeks ago. "You know," he said conversationally, his voice carrying easily through the dead silence, "I've been thinking about this moment for quite some time, planning it really, and I realized something interesting. Revenge isn't just about punishment, it's about education." He turned away from Riaz to address the wider crowd, his glowing eyes sweeping across the assembled supernatural elite. "How many of you have sacred gear users in your service? How many of you recruited them with promises of family, belonging, purpose? How many of you have reassigned them when they became inconvenient?" The uncomfortable shifting that rippled through the crowd provided its own answer. "I thought so," Issei continued, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Which means this isn't just about the Gremory family's particular brand of manipulation. This is about a system that treats people like myself as disposable resources." A middle-aged devil noble stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of centuries of political experience. "Young man, whatever grievances you may have, this is neither the time nor the place for." "Sit down," Issei said quietly. The command carried such absolute authority that the noble found himself complying before he'd consciously decided to move. Only after he was back in his seat did he realize what had happened, and the cold terror that followed that realization rippled through every supernatural being present. "As I was saying," Issei continued as if nothing had happened, "education. The curriculum will be simple. You will learn what it feels like to be used, manipulated, and discarded, starting with my former friends." His gaze fixed on Kiba, who stood frozen near the gymnasium's side exit. Yuyudo Kiba, the loyal knight who was so convincing in his role as supportive teammate. The blonde devil felt his legs moving without his permission, carrying him forward until he stood directly in front of Issei. Every instinct screamed at him to resist, to fight, to do anything but submit to this humiliation, but his body refused to obey. "Tell them," Issei said, his truth sight boring into Kiba's soul. "Tell everyone here exactly what you thought of me during our time together." Kiba struggled against the compulsion, but the words came anyway, torn from his throat by forces he couldn't resist. "I thought you were pathetic, desperate for approval, willing to throw yourself into any danger just for a kind word. It was exhausting having to pretend your perverted fantasies were endearing instead of disgusting." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. The careful fiction of peerage bonds, of genuine friendship between devil servants, was crumbling in real time. "And yet," Issei continued relentlessly, "you played your part so well. The concerned friend, the supportive comrade, Academy award-worthy performance, really." He raised his corrupted sacred gear, and tendrils of dark energy reached out to touch Kiba's forehead. The knight's eyes widened in shock as he felt something being drained from his very essence. "Holy Sword integration, absorbing sword birth capabilities." "Thank you for the donation," Issei said as Kiba collapsed to his knees, his sacred gear now noticeably dimmer. "I'll make better use of it than you ever did." The casual theft of another person's abilities sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Sacred gears were supposed to be inviolate, bound to their users in ways that couldn't be severed. Yet they just watched Issei drain Kiba's power as easily as drawing water from a well. "Kaneko Taoju," Issei called next, and the small Nekomata found herself walking forward despite every fiber of her being screaming in protest. The quiet one who just followed orders without questioning their morality. Her golden eyes met his glowing gaze without flinching, the stoic acceptance that had defined her character remaining intact even in the face of absolute humiliation. "At least you're honest about it," Issei acknowledged. "No false protests, no attempts at justification. You did what you were told because that's what you've always done." His sacred gear pulsed, and Kaneko felt her enhanced strength begin to drain away, flowing into the hungry darkness of his evolved armor. Physical enhancement integration, absorbing Nekomata strength. "Your power will serve a better purpose now," he said as she too fell to her knees, her supernatural strength reduced to barely above human levels. "At least I won't use it to enable other people's cruelty." One by one, he called them forward. Each member of his former peerage was forced to confess their true feelings, to admit their participation in the deception, to watch as he casually stripped away the abilities they'd spent years developing. Aquino's electrical powers flowed into his armor like captured lightning. Lightning manipulation integration, complete. Asia's healing abilities merged with his system, though he made no attempt to hide his disgust at taking power from someone who'd claimed to represent divine compassion. Healing factor integration, corrupted variant absorbed. By the time he was finished with them, his former peerage lay broken on the gymnasium floor, not dead, but stripped of the supernatural abilities that had defined their identities, reduced to shadows of their former selves. And now, Issei said, turning back to Riaz, we come to the architect of this little performance. But as he approached her, something unexpected happened. Instead of the fear or defiance he'd anticipated, he saw something else in her crimson eyes, something that looked disturbingly like desire. "You're magnificent," she whispered, her voice carrying genuine awe. "I never imagined. The power you've achieved, the presence you command. This is what I always wanted you to become." The admission caught Issei off guard. He'd expected begging, threats, political maneuvering, anything but this naked admiration for the very transformation her betrayal had triggered. "You destroyed me," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Everything I was, everything I believed in, you took it all away." "I know," she replied, stepping closer despite the dangerous energy crackling around him. "And look what it created. You're no longer the weak boy who needed constant validation. You're strong, independent, powerful enough to reshape the world itself." Her hand reached out as if to touch his face, but stopped just short of the corrupted energy that surrounded him. "I love what you've become, Issei. I love the strength, the confidence, the way you command absolute attention just by existing." "You love my power," he corrected coldly. "Just like you loved my usefulness before. Nothing has changed except the nature of what you want from me." "Maybe," she admitted with startling honesty. "But isn't that better than the lies? At least now we both understand what this really is." Around them, the supernatural community watched in fascination as the confrontation took an unexpected turn. This wasn't the simple revenge scenario they'd anticipated. This was something far more complex and potentially dangerous. "You want to know what I've become?" Issei asked, his voice carrying a note of dark amusement. "I've become someone who sees through every lie, every manipulation, every false promise. Someone who takes what he needs and discards what he doesn't." His truth sight focused on her face, and he saw the layers of her motivations laid bare, genuine attraction to his power, political calculations about his usefulness, fear of what he might do to her, and underneath it all, something that might have been actual regret for the pain she'd caused. "You're attracted to strength," he observed clinically. "You always have been. The difference is that now I have it and you can't control it." "I don't want to control it," she said, her voice carrying surprising sincerity. "I want to be part of it. I want to stand beside you as you reshape this world." "As my equal?" The question was sharp with skeptical amusement. "As whatever you'll allow me to be," she replied, and the desperate hunger in her voice made several supernatural beings in the crowd step back involuntarily. Issei studied her for a long moment, his evolved sacred gear pulsing with absorbed energies from her broken peerage. The boy who'd loved her was dead, incinerated in the fires of betrayal and trauma, but what remained was something that understood power dynamics with perfect clarity. "No," he said finally, his voice carrying the finality of a closing door. "You had your chance to stand beside me and you chose to use me instead. That door is closed forever." The rejection hit her like a physical blow, but instead of backing down, her eyes blazed with something that looked almost like passion. "Then what?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of desperation that made her sound younger and more vulnerable than her centuries of existence. "What happens now?" Issei smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Now," he said, "you learn what it feels like to want something you can never have, to be dismissed by someone you desperately need, to discover that all your political games and manipulative skills are worthless against someone who simply doesn't care about your offers." He turned to address the wider crowd, his voice carrying the authority of someone who just reshaped the supernatural world's power structure through pure force of will. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," he announced. "The age of treating sacred gear users as disposable tools is over. From now on, we are not your pawns, your weapons, or your convenient solutions to political problems. We are equals or we are enemies. Choose wisely." With that pronouncement, he began to walk toward the gymnasium's exit, leaving behind a crowd of stunned supernatural beings and the broken remnants of what had once been the Gremory peerage. But as he reached the doors, Ria's voice called out behind him, carrying a note of desperate determination that made him pause. "This isn't over, Issei. I'll find a way to prove myself worthy of you. I'll find a way to earn what I threw away." He didn't turn around, but his voice carried clearly through the silent space. "You're welcome to try, Rias, but understand, the boy who would have been grateful for your attention is gone. What remains has far higher standards." As the doors closed behind him, the gymnasium erupted in chaos. Political alliances shifted in real time, treaties were reconsidered, and power structures that had seemed eternal suddenly felt fragile and temporary. The fallen emperor had returned to the world, and nothing would ever be the same. But in her heart, Ria's Gremory felt something she'd never experienced before, the burning need to prove herself worthy of someone who no longer needed her approval. The hunt had begun, and she would not stop until she'd earned the right to stand beside the monster her betrayal had created. Even if it took centuries. Even if it destroyed her in the process. Even if he never forgave her for what she'd done. Because for the first time in her long life, she'd encountered someone who was truly beyond her reach, and that only made her want him more. 3 days after the Kyo Academy incident, the Gremory family estate had been transformed into something resembling a war room. Maps, intelligence reports, and strategic assessments covered every available surface, while high-ranking devils moved through the corridors, with the grim efficiency of people managing a crisis that threatened their entire power structure. The supernatural world was still reeling from the events at the Academy, and every major faction was scrambling to understand the implications of what they'd witnessed. At the center of it all, Ria's Gremory stood before a massive window overlooking the estate's gardens, her reflection ghost-like in the darkened glass. She hadn't slept in 3 days, hadn't eaten more than necessary to maintain basic function, hadn't done anything but obsess over the image of Issei walking away from her with casual indifference. "The political ramifications are still unfolding," Surzech said from behind her, his voice carrying the weight of someone trying to manage an impossible situation. 3 dozen sacred gear users have already severed their contracts with devil families. The other factions are reconsidering their alliance treaties, and the media. He gestured helplessly at the stack of newspapers and digital reports that painted the devil nobility in increasingly unflattering terms. Sacred gear slavery exposed, the disposable HEROES of supernatural politics, devil manipulation TACTICS REVEALED. The headlines grew more damaging by the hour. "I don't care about the politics," Ria said quietly, her voice carrying a hollow quality that worried her brother more than any emotional outburst would have. "Rias, you have to understand the position this puts our family in." "I said I don't care." Her reflection in the window showed eyes that had been stripped of their usual warmth, replaced by something hungry and desperate. "There's only one thing that matters now." Surzech studied his sister with growing concern. In the 3 days since the Academy incident, she'd become someone he barely recognized, single-minded to the point of obsession, driven by desires she couldn't or wouldn't articulate clearly. "You need to let this go," he said gently. "What happened with Issei was unfortunate, but he's beyond our reach now. The fallen angels have him, and even if we could somehow negotiate his return." "He's magnificent," Rias interrupted, her voice carrying a note of awe that made Surzech step back involuntarily. "Did you see him at the Academy? The power he commanded, the absolute authority in his presence. He reshaped the entire political landscape with nothing but his will and his strength." "He humiliated you in front of the entire supernatural community," Surzech pointed out, his voice sharp with protective anger. "He stripped your peerage of their abilities, exposed our family's strategies, and made us all look like amateur manipulators." "Yes," Rias breathed, and there was something disturbingly like pleasure in her voice. "He did all of that, and he made it look effortless. Do you understand what that means? The raw power required, the absolute confidence, the complete mastery of every situation." Surzech felt a chill run down his spine as he began to understand what was happening to his sister. The humiliation hadn't broken her, it had done something far worse. It had shown her what true power looked like, and now she was addicted to it. Riaz, he said carefully, what exactly are you planning? She turned from the window for the first time in hours, and the expression on her face made him take an involuntary step backward. Her crimson eyes blazed with the kind of intensity he'd only seen in devils who'd lost all sense of self-preservation. I'm going to find him, she said with absolute certainty. I'm going to prove myself worthy of standing beside someone with that kind of power. I'm going to earn what I threw away. That's impossible. You heard what he said. The door is closed forever. Then I'll break it down, she replied without hesitation. I'll become strong enough, valuable enough, irresistible enough that he'll have no choice but to acknowledge me. The plan that had been forming in her mind over the past 3 days spilled out in a torrent of desperate ambition. She would seek out the strongest opponents, absorb their techniques, push her own abilities beyond their current limitations. She would study fallen angel magic, learn their combat techniques, become fluent in the political networks Issei now moved through. She would transform herself into someone worthy of the monster her betrayal had created. You're talking about obsession, Surzech said, his voice heavy with concern. This isn't love, Riaz. This is something far more dangerous. Love, she laughed, and the sound carried no warmth whatsoever. What I felt for the weak boy was obligation mixed with mild affection. What I feel for what he's become is something entirely different. She moved to her desk, where intelligence reports about Issei's current activities lay scattered across the polished wood. Photos of the destruction he'd wrought, analysis of his evolved abilities, speculation about his training regimen. She'd absorbed every scrap of information like a scholar studying her life's work. He's operating at a level that approaches Satan-class power, she said, her voice carrying genuine admiration. The fallen angels are using him as their primary weapon for reshaping supernatural politics. Every move he makes changes the balance of power across multiple realms. And you think you can somehow insert yourself into that equation? I think he needs someone who understands power on his level, she replied with absolute conviction. Someone who can match his political acumen, his strategic thinking, his willingness to reshape the world according to his vision. Surzech studied the reports she'd been obsessing over, nodding the meticulous analysis she'd conducted of every aspect of Issei's transformation. This wasn't the work of someone driven by simple romantic attraction. This was the research of someone planning a military campaign. What's your first move? He asked, recognizing that arguing further would be pointless. Asia, Riaz said immediately. She's the weakest link, the one most likely to break under pressure. I'll find her, convince her to help me contact him, use her guilt about the betrayal as leverage. And if she refuses? Then I'll find another way, and another after that. I'll remake myself from the ground up if necessary. Her eyes blazed with the fervor of absolute commitment. I've seen what true power looks like now, Surzech. I've been in the presence of someone who can reshape reality through pure force of will. I can't go back to the small, comfortable world I used to inhabit. The hunger in her voice was so intense that Surzech found himself backing toward the door. This wasn't his sister anymore. This was someone who'd been fundamentally changed by exposure to something beyond her previous understanding of possibility. Be careful, Riaz, he said quietly. The path you're choosing, it doesn't lead to happiness, only to more hunger, more obsession, more desperate need for something you might never obtain. I don't want happiness, she replied, her attention already turning back to the intelligence reports. I want him. I want to stand beside someone powerful enough to make the entire supernatural world step back in recognition. I want to be worthy of the respect that comes with that kind of strength. As Surzech left the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just witnessed the birth of something dangerous. His sister's obsession with Issei had moved beyond personal desire into something that could destabilize their entire family's position in Devil Society. But there was nothing he could do to stop her. The hunger in her eyes was too absolute, too consuming to be reasoned with or redirected. Meanwhile, in a small apartment on the outskirts of Q City, Asia Argento sat in darkness, staring at her hands where her healing powers used to flow like warm light. The abilities Issei had drained from her were gone permanently, leaving her feeling hollow and purposeless in ways she'd never experienced. The knock on her door came just after midnight, soft but insistent. When she opened it, Riaz stood in the hallway, her crimson hair disheveled and her eyes blazing with manic intensity. We need to talk, Riaz said, pushing past Asia into the small apartment. About Issei, about what we did to him, about how we're going to fix it. Asia stared at her former master, recognizing the same desperate hunger that had been growing in her own chest since the academy incident. The need to somehow undo their betrayal, to prove themselves worthy of forgiveness from someone who no longer needed their approval. "He'll never forgive us," Asia whispered, the words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "I don't want his forgiveness," Riaz replied, her voice sharp with desperate ambition. "I want his recognition. I want him to see me as an equal, as someone worthy of standing beside him as he reshapes the world." How? By becoming indispensable to his plans, by proving our value not through apologies or emotional appeals, but through demonstrating that we can match his vision and ambition. Riaz moved to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the darkness as she stared out at the city where Issei had once lived as a powerless human. "He's going to return," she said with absolute conviction. "When he does, we need to be ready. We need to be strong enough, valuable enough, necessary enough that he can't dismiss us as easily as he did at the academy. And if we're not, then we'll learn what it truly means to be discarded by someone whose approval we desperately need," Riaz replied, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd glimpsed her own irrelevance and been transformed by the experience. As the two former devils began planning their desperate campaign to earn the attention of the monster their betrayal had created, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows across the street. Issei stood in the darkness, his evolved sacred gear allowing him to monitor their conversation from a distance. He'd known they would seek him out eventually. Desperation made people predictable, and both Riaz and Asia radiated the kind of hunger that would drive them to increasingly extreme measures. The question wasn't whether they would come for him, the question was whether he would be merciful when they did. As he turned away from their planning session and disappeared into the night, Issei found himself almost looking forward to their next encounter. After all, he'd promised to teach them what it felt like to want something they could never have. Soon, very soon, that education would continue. And this time, the lesson would be far more comprehensive than anything they'd experienced at the academy. The fallen emperor was patient, but he was not forgiving. And those who sought his attention would learn the difference between the two in ways they would never forget. 1 week after the Kyoto Academy incident, the abandoned church on the outskirts of Kyoto City had become an unlikely meeting place for desperate measures. Moonlight filtered through broken stained glass windows, casting fractured rainbows across dust-covered pews where Asia knelt in prayer. Her words echoed softly in the empty space, a litany of regret and desperate hope that had consumed her every waking moment since losing her healing abilities. "Please," she whispered to whatever divine force might still listen to a fallen nun, "show me how to make this right. Show me how to earn forgiveness for what we did to him." "Forgiveness isn't what you should be seeking." The voice came from the shadows near the altar, calm and controlled in a way that made Asia's blood freeze. She turned slowly, already knowing who she would see but still unprepared for the reality of his presence. Issei stepped into the moonlight, his corrupted sacred gear casting writhing shadows that seemed to devour the colored light from the windows. He looked even more transformed than he had at the academy, leaner, harder, with an aura of absolute authority that made the abandoned church feel like a throne room. "Issei-kun," Asia breathed, her voice carrying a mixture of hope and terror that would have been heartbreaking if he'd still possessed the capacity for such emotions. "Not anymore," he corrected gently. That name belonged to someone who believed in the kindness of others, someone who trusted in the bonds of friendship and family, someone who died in this very church weeks ago. The reference to his original death at Rainier's hands hit Asia like a physical blow. She'd been there that night, had watched him die and felt genuine grief for the loss, only to later participate in the systematic deception that would destroy him far more thoroughly than any fallen angel's light spear. "I've been waiting for you to come here," Issei continued, moving closer with the predatory grace of someone completely comfortable with his own power. "This place holds significant meaning, doesn't it? Your first real betrayal, your first taste of how cruel the supernatural world can be." "I never wanted to hurt you," Asia said, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "I genuinely cared about you, I really did. But when Riaz-sama explained the larger political situation, when she told me how important it was for the future of Devil Society." "You chose compliance over courage," Issei finished for her, his voice carrying no anger, only clinical assessment. You chose the easy path of following orders rather than the difficult path of standing up for what you knew was right. His truth sight activated, and Asia felt the familiar crushing inability to maintain any deception. Under that terrible, knowing gaze, every justification she'd constructed crumbled into dust. "Tell me what you really thought," he commanded softly. "When you realized what we were doing to me, what did you actually feel?" The words came against her will, torn from her throat by forces she couldn't resist. "I felt sick. I felt guilty every time I smiled at you, every time I pretended to care about your well-being. I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was afraid of disappointing Ria-sama, afraid of disrupting the political plans she'd worked so hard to create. And after the betrayal was revealed, when you saw me leave that night, I felt relief," she whispered, the admission destroying the last of her self-image as the innocent, caring member of the group. Relief that I wouldn't have to pretend anymore, that the charade was finally over. The brutal honesty hung in the air between them like a blade. Issei studied her face, noting the genuine anguish there but feeling nothing resembling sympathy. Pain was an excellent teacher, and Asia was clearly learning lessons she'd avoided for too long. "And now," he asked, "what do you feel now?" "Empty," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hollow, like everything that defined me was taken away when you drained my healing abilities. I don't know who I am without the power to help others." "Interesting," Issei mused, settling into one of the front pews with casual elegance. "You define yourself by your ability to heal, but you use that same identity to justify participating in something that would wound someone far more deeply than any physical injury." He gestured at the broken altar where moonlight revealed the stains from his original death. "This is where it all began, you know, where Rainier killed me, where you first showed genuine emotion about my suffering. That grief was real, wasn't it?" "Yes," Asia said immediately, "completely real. I mourned for you, I prayed for your soul, I genuinely believed you deserved better than what happened. And yet, months later, you participated in something far crueler than anything Rainier did to me. She killed my body, but you helped kill my spirit, my capacity for trust, my ability to believe in the goodness of others." The words hit Asia like physical blows, each one highlighting the magnitude of what they'd done. Rainier's betrayal had been quick, brutal, but ultimately simple. What the Gremory peerage had done was systematic psychological torture disguised as love and friendship. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't matter, I know it can't undo what we did, but I need you to know that I regret every moment of it." "I know you do," Issei replied, his voice carrying surprising gentleness. "Your regret is genuine, just as your original grief was genuine. The question is, what are you going to do with that regret?" The unexpected shift in his tone made Asia look up, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time since the Academy incident. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you have a choice to make. You can wallow in guilt and self-pity, defining yourself as the victim of circumstances beyond your control. Or you can accept responsibility for your actions and work to ensure that no one else suffers what I suffered." He leaned forward, his glowing eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her feel like her soul was being examined and judged. "There are others like me, Asia. Sacred gear users recruited with promises of family and belonging, only to be used and discarded when convenient. The system that created my situation is still in place, still functioning, still destroying lives. You want me to help you change it? I want you to prove that your regret is more than empty words, that your grief for what you participated in can be transformed into action that prevents future victims." Asia stared at him, her mind racing as she tried to understand what he was offering. Not forgiveness, he'd made it clear that door was permanently closed, but something else, purpose perhaps, a way to transform her guilt into something productive. "What would I have to do?" "Exactly what you should have done in the first place," Issei replied. "Stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it means defying authority figures you respect, even when it means sacrificing your own comfort and security." He stood and moved toward the altar, his corrupted sacred gear pulsing with dark energy that made the shadows dance. "The supernatural world is changing, Asia. The old systems of exploitation and manipulation are being challenged. You can be part of building something better, or you can remain a bystander who watched injustice happen and did nothing to stop it." "But I don't have my healing abilities anymore. What can I offer?" Your insight into devil political structures, your understanding of how recruitment and manipulation work, your ability to recognize the warning signs that someone is being set up for the kind of betrayal I experienced. He turned back to face her, and for a moment she caught a glimpse of something that might have been the boy she'd once known, not forgiveness, but perhaps the possibility of understanding. The question is whether you're brave enough to actually help, or whether you'll find another authority figure to hide behind when things become difficult. Before Asia could respond, the church doors opened and Riaz entered, her crimson hair catching the moonlight as she moved down the center aisle with determined steps. She'd clearly been waiting for this moment, preparing for what might be her only chance to speak with Issei directly. "I thought I might find you here," she said, her voice carrying forced confidence that didn't quite hide the desperation underneath. "This place has always been significant for you, hasn't it?" Issei didn't turn to acknowledge her presence, but Asia could see the tension that entered his posture. "Riaz, come to make another offer, another attempt at manipulation disguised as cooperation." "No," Riaz said, moving closer until she stood just a few pews away. "I came to tell you the truth. The complete truth, without any political calculations or strategic considerations." "How refreshing, please enlighten me." Riaz took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone confessing to crimes they could no longer bear to hide. "The arranged marriage to Rizer wasn't just my family's idea. I supported it initially. I saw it as a way to gain political influence, to position myself for greater power within Devil society. You were never meant to be a permanent part of my peerage. You were recruited specifically to serve as a weapon against Rizer, after which you would be reassigned to less important duties." The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Even Asia gasped at the casual brutality of it, the calculated cruelty that had gone into every aspect of Issei's recruitment and manipulation. "But something changed," Riaz continued, her voice growing stronger. "Not during the raiding game, not after your victory. It changed at the academy when I saw what you'd become, when I realized what real power looked like." She moved closer, her eyes blazing with the same desperate hunger that had consumed her for the past week. "I've spent every moment since then studying your transformation, analyzing your abilities, trying to understand how someone could evolve so completely. And I realized something that terrifies and exhilarates me in equal measure. Which is that I was never worthy of standing beside you, not before when you were kind and trusting and desperate for approval. And certainly not now when you've become something that can reshape the world through pure force of will." The raw honesty in her voice was startling in its intensity. This wasn't the manipulative devil noble who'd orchestrated his recruitment. This was someone who'd been fundamentally changed by exposure to power beyond her previous understanding. "So what do you want, Riaz?" Issei asked, finally turning to face her directly. "I want to earn the right to stand beside you," she said without hesitation. "Not as your master, not as someone who controls or directs you, but as someone worthy of your respect. Someone strong enough, valuable enough, necessary enough that you would choose to keep me in your orbit." "And you think that's possible?" "I think it's the only thing worth pursuing," she replied with absolute conviction. "I've seen what true power looks like now. I can't go back to the small, comfortable world I used to inhabit. I need to become something more, something worthy of the attention of someone who can command the respect of the entire supernatural community." Issei studied her face with his truth sight, seeing the layers of her motivations laid bare. The political calculations were still there, but underneath them was something raw and desperate, genuine attraction to power, yes, but also something that might have been actual regret for the path that had led to this moment. "You're not seeking my forgiveness," he observed. "Forgiveness implies that I deserve it, that I can somehow undo what I did through contrition and good intentions. I know better than that." Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd abandoned comfortable illusions. "What I'm seeking is the chance to prove that I can become someone you would choose to work with, not because you owe me anything, but because I've made myself valuable enough to earn that position." The church fell silent except for the whisper of wind through broken windows. Asia watched the exchange with growing understanding. This wasn't about romance or emotional reconciliation. This was about power dynamics, about respect earned through demonstrated worth rather than given through emotional obligation. "You understand what that would require?" Issei asked. "Complete submission to your vision and authority," Riaz replied immediately. abandoning my family's political agenda in favor of supporting yours, accepting that you are the dominant partner in any arrangement we might reach. And you're willing to do that. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to stand beside someone powerful enough to reshape the supernatural world, even if it means giving up everything I used to think I wanted. Issei was quiet for a long moment, his corrupted sacred gear pulsing as he processed the implications of what he'd just heard. Both women were offering him something, but their offers came from very different places. Asia's from guilt and a desire to make amends, Ria's from hunger and a desperate need to be associated with true power. Very well, he said finally, but understand this isn't forgiveness, this isn't redemption. This is purely transactional. You will both prove your value through actions, not words. You will both accept that your comfort, your safety, your previous positions of authority mean nothing to me. He moved toward the church doors, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. Asia, you will help me identify and protect other sacred gear users who are being exploited by devil political games. Riaz, you will provide intelligence about devil society's power structures and political vulnerabilities. And in return, Riaz asked, in return, you will be allowed to observe as I reshape the supernatural world into something that doesn't treat people like myself as disposable tools. You will be permitted to serve a cause greater than your own ambition. The offer was stark in its lack of emotional warmth, but both women recognized it for what it was, the only path back to relevance in a world where Issei now held unprecedented power. I accept, Ria said immediately. I accept, Asia echoed, her voice carrying new determination. Issei paused at the threshold, moonlight casting his shadow back toward the altar where his human life had ended and his journey toward ultimate power had begun. Then we begin tomorrow, he said, and understand this is your only chance. Betray me again, disappoint me again, or fail to prove your worth, and you will discover what it truly means to be discarded by someone whose approval you desperately need. As he disappeared into the night, leaving both women alone in the abandoned church, neither Riaz nor Asia felt triumph or relief. Instead, they felt the weight of understanding that they were no longer the masters of their own destinies. They had become servants in someone else's grand design, and that someone was the monster their own betrayal had created. But for the first time since the Academy incident, they had purpose again. Not redemption, not forgiveness, but the chance to be useful to someone whose vision extended far beyond their previous understanding of possibility. It would have to be enough. Because in the world the fallen emperor was building, it was the only option they would ever receive. 2 months after the church meeting, the penthouse overlooking Cute City had been transformed into the unofficial headquarters of what supernatural intelligence agencies were calling the Fallen Emperor's Network. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided panoramic views of the territory Issei now controlled through a combination of political maneuvering, strategic alliances, and the simple fact that no one was willing to challenge someone who could drain sacred gears at will. Issei stood before the main window, his evolved armor now a masterpiece of corrupted artistry that incorporated power stolen from dozens of sources. Black metal carved with intricate patterns of pulsing energy covered most of his torso, while tendrils of dark power moved independently around him like living extensions of his will. In the 2 months since accepting Riaz and Asia back into his orbit, he'd continued to grow stronger, more influential, more terrifyingly effective at reshaping the supernatural world according to his vision. Behind him, his new organization operated with the efficiency of a military unit. Asia coordinated with sacred gear users across 3 continents, providing them with protection, training, and most importantly, the knowledge that they had allies who understood their struggles. Riaz managed intelligence networks that had infiltrated every major devil house, providing real-time information about political movements and potential threats to their operations. The latest reports from the rating game committee, Riaz announced, entering the main room with a tablet displaying the day's intelligence briefings. She changed significantly over the past 2 months, still beautiful, still commanding, but now carrying herself with the focused intensity of someone who'd found her true calling in service to a greater power. 7 more sacred gear users have terminated their contracts with devil families, she continued, settling into her role as his primary intelligence coordinator. They're citing our intervention guidelines and demanding the protections we've established for exploited contractors. Issei nodded without turning from the window, and the family's responses, ranging from grudging compliance to barely concealed rage. The Phoenix House has officially lodged a complaint with the Satan class leadership about interference in internal family matters. Let them complain, Issei said, his voice carrying the casual confidence of someone who'd stopped caring about traditional power structures. Their objections only prove that our intervention was necessary. Asia entered from the communications center, her expression carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd found redemption through meaningful work. The Prague situation has been resolved. The sacred gear user they were trying to force into an arranged marriage has been relocated to one of our safe houses, and we've provided her family with protection guarantees. Excellent work, Issei acknowledged, finally turning from the window to face his reformed organization. What about the Vienna conference? All major faction leaders have confirmed attendance, Riaz reported, unable to hide her excitement at the political implications. Angels, devils, fallen angels, and representatives from 12 sacred gear user advocacy groups. This will be the largest supernatural political gathering in centuries. The Vienna conference represented the culmination of 2 months of careful maneuvering. Issei had used his growing influence to force the supernatural community to acknowledge sacred gear users as independent political entities rather than resources to be claimed by the major factions. The gathering would establish formal protocols for recruitment, treatment, and protection of sacred gear users across all supernatural territories. Any resistance we should prepare for, he asked. The usual suspects, Asia replied, consulting her own reports. Several old guard devil houses are coordinating to challenge our authority at the conference. They're arguing that sacred gear users lack the political sophistication to represent themselves effectively. They're not entirely wrong, Issei admitted with dark amusement. Most sacred gear users have been so thoroughly conditioned to accept subservient roles that they struggle with the concept of actual equality. That's why we need to succeed, to prove that another way is possible. He moved to the conference table where maps and strategic assessments covered the polished surface. Riaz, what's the status on our Vienna security arrangements? Complete, she replied immediately, falling into the role of loyal subordinate with an ease that would have shocked her former peerage members. 36 of our most capable allies will be in attendance, with backup teams positioned throughout the city. No one will be able to threaten the conference without facing immediate retaliation. And the media coverage. Comprehensive, every major supernatural news network will be present, along with representatives from human media organizations we've carefully cultivated. Whatever happens in Vienna will be broadcast across every realm of existence. Issei nodded approvingly. In the 2 months since their reconciliation, both Riaz and Asia had proven their value beyond his initial expectations. Riaz's political acumen and strategic thinking had been instrumental in building the coalition that made the Vienna conference possible, while Asia's genuine empathy and communication skills had helped rehabilitate dozens of traumatized sacred gear users. There's something else, Riaz said, her voice carrying a note of carefully controlled emotion. Something personal. Issei's attention sharpened. Over the past 2 months, both women had been scrupulously professional in their interactions with him, never presuming on their past relationships or expecting emotional consideration beyond what their work had earned. What is it? The marriage proposal from the Citri family arrived this morning, she said, placing an ornate envelope on the conference table. They're offering their eldest daughter, along with significant political concessions, in exchange for an alliance between our organization and their house. The proposal was hardly surprising. In the 2 months since establishing his network, Issei had received similar offers from dozens of supernatural families eager to ally themselves with his growing power. What was surprising was the way Riaz was presenting it, with obvious tension she was struggling to conceal. "In your assessment," he asked, curious about her reaction. "Politically advantageous," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. The Citri family has significant influence in devil educational institutions, which would give us access to young sacred gear users before they can be exploited by less scrupulous families. But he could hear the unspoken reservation in her tone. Riaz was quiet for a long moment, her crimson eyes fixed on the envelope with an intensity that suggested internal conflict. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone confessing to desires they'd tried to suppress. "But I don't want you to accept it," she said quietly. "I know I have no right to object. I know our arrangement is purely professional, but the thought of you marrying someone else, it's harder to accept than I anticipated." The admission hung in the air between them like a blade. Asia looked up from her reports with obvious surprise. In 2 months of working together, neither woman had acknowledged the personal dimensions of their changed relationship with Issei. "You're jealous," Issei observed, his truth sight revealing the layers of her emotional response. "Despite everything that's happened, despite the purely transactional nature of our current arrangement, you still want exclusive access to my attention." "Yes," Riaz admitted without attempting to defend or justify the feeling. "I've tried to suppress it, tried to focus purely on the work we're doing together, but the jealousy is real and it's stronger than I expected." Issei studied her face, noting the genuine vulnerability there. In 2 months of working together, she'd proven her value repeatedly. Her intelligence work had prevented 3 separate attempts to sabotage their operations. Her political connections had opened doors that would have taken years to unlock otherwise, and her strategic advice had been instrumental in planning the Vienna conference. "And what do you think that jealousy entitles you to?" he asked. "Nothing," she replied immediately. "I know I forfeited any claim to your personal attention when I chose to betray your trust. I know our current arrangement exists purely because I've made myself professionally valuable, not because I've earned any kind of emotional consideration." "But you want more." "I want what I threw away," she said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute honesty. "I want to be the person who stands beside you not just as a professional ally but as a partner in every sense of the word. I want to be worthy of your love again, even though I know that's probably impossible." The confession was raw in its vulnerability, made more powerful by the fact that she clearly expected nothing from it. This wasn't manipulation or strategic positioning, this was simply truth, offered without hope of reward. "Asia," Issei said, turning to the former nun who'd been watching the exchange with obvious fascination. "What's your perspective on this situation?" Asia was quiet for a moment, clearly considering her words carefully. "I think Riaz has proven herself over the past 2 months in ways that go beyond professional competence. She's genuinely changed, genuinely committed to the vision we're building together. And I think she's earned the right to at least be considered as more than just a professional ally. Even though she was the architect of my original betrayal." "Because she was the architect," Asia replied, her voice carrying surprising conviction. "She understands the magnitude of what she destroyed better than anyone. She knows exactly what she's trying to earn back, and she's willing to work for it without any guarantee of success." Issei moved to the window again, staring out at the city where his human life had begun and his transformation into something beyond humanity had been completed. The boy who desperately wanted Riaz's love was dead, incinerated in the fires of betrayal and trauma. But what remained was something that could make choices based on practical considerations rather than emotional need. "The Vienna conference is in 3 days," he said finally. "After that, assuming our efforts are successful, we'll have established a new political framework for sacred gear users across the supernatural world. The immediate crisis will be resolved." He turned back to face both women, his expression unreadable. "At that point, we'll need to decide what comes next, whether this organization continues as a professional alliance or evolves into something more personal." "What are you saying?" Riaz asked, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time since their reconciliation. "I'm saying that you've both proven your value over the past 2 months, not just as professional allies, but as people who have genuinely changed, who have found ways to transform their guilt and regret into meaningful action." His voice carried no warmth, but there was something that might have been approval. That kind of growth deserves recognition. He moved to his desk and withdrew a small black box, setting it on the conference table between them. "This contains devil pieces of my own creation, not bound to traditional power structures, but designed to establish genuine partnerships based on mutual respect and shared purpose." Both women stared at the box as if it contained the keys to redemption itself. "I'm offering you the chance to become part of something permanent," Issei continued. "Not as subordinates or servants, but as equals in building the world we've envisioned together. But understand, this isn't about romance or emotional reconciliation. This is about recognizing that you've both earned the right to stand beside me as we reshape supernatural society." "And the marriage proposal?" Riaz asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Will be politely declined," Issei replied. "I have no interest in political marriages designed to secure alliances. If I choose to form personal bonds with anyone, it will be with people who have proven themselves worthy through their actions, not their family connections." The weight of implication in his words was not lost on either woman. After 2 months of uncertainty, of working without any guarantee that their efforts would earn them anything beyond professional respect, they were being offered something they'd thought was permanently beyond their reach. "I accept," Ria said immediately, her voice carrying absolute conviction. "I accept," Asia echoed, tears of relief streaming down her face. Issei nodded and opened the box, revealing devil pieces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, artifacts of power that would bind them not to servitude, but to partnership in reshaping the world. "Then we move forward together," he said, placing the pieces on the table between them, not as master and servants, but as equals committed to ensuring that no one else suffers what I suffered, what we all suffered in different ways. As both women reached for the pieces that would seal their new alliance, none of them spoke of love or forgiveness or emotional healing. Those concepts belonged to a simpler world than the one they now inhabited. Instead, they spoke of power, of purpose, of the practical work of building something better from the ashes of what had been destroyed. It wasn't redemption exactly, but it was something rarer and more valuable, the chance to transform betrayal into strength, trauma into wisdom, and personal pain into systemic change that would protect countless others. 3 days later, as supernatural leaders gathered in Vienna to ratify the accords that would reshape their world forever, Issei stood before the assembly as the acknowledged leader of a new political force. Beside him stood 2 women who'd earned their positions not through birth or manipulation, but through genuine transformation and demonstrated worth. The fallen emperor had claimed his crown not through conquest, but through the simple act of refusing to accept a world that treated people like himself as disposable. And in doing so, he'd created something unprecedented, a future where strength served justice rather than ambition, where power protected the vulnerable rather than exploiting them, and where betrayal could be transformed into the foundation for something infinitely better than what had come before. The boy who died in an abandoned church was gone forever, but what had risen from his ashes would ensure that his suffering had meaning and that no one else would face the choice between submission and destruction. In the end, that was victory enough for anyone, even the fallen emperor who'd learned to reshape the world through the simple act of refusing to accept its cruelties as inevitable. The crown was heavy, but it was earned. And those who wore it had learned that true power came not from taking what you wanted, but from protecting what others needed. The end. And there you have it. What an absolutely epic journey we just witnessed. We saw Issei transform from a broken, betrayed pawn into the fallen emperor who reshaped the entire supernatural world. From rock bottom in that abandoned warehouse to standing as an equal with Satan-class beings, commanding respect from every faction and ultimately building something better than what came before. And that ending where Riaz and Asia earned their way back into his life. Chef's kiss, pure perfection. What was your favorite moment from this story? Was it the absolutely devastating betrayal scene at the celebration? That insane sacred gear evolution sequence? Or maybe when he systematically destroyed his former peerage at the academy? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading your reactions to these epic tales. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed this masterpiece and let me know what other what-if scenarios you want to see explored. Trust me, we've got some absolutely broken concepts coming up that are going to melt your minds. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.